Welcome into OutKick the show. I'm your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I hope all of you had fabulous Easter weekends and that you enjoyed as much time with your friends and your family as could be imaginable. We have got an awful lot to dive into here. We've got the Final Four set. What do we learn? Zach Edey versus DJ Burns in a battle of likable versus unlikable big men. I'll break that down. Dalton Connect in Tennessee go down guns blazing. Duke goes out as well. We will discuss everything that took place in the men's tournament tonight. You have got Iowa going up against LSU, getting a lot of pop and attention. We'll talk about that. Joe Biden says that there's a trans day of visibility on Easter. We will discuss. The National Organization of Women has weighed in on men participating in women's sports, and they say, spoiler alert, you are a white supremacist bigot if you are opposed to men pretending to be women competing in women's athletics. All of that coming your direction. But let's go ahead and start right off the top. You can get hooked up right now if you are smart enough, if you are fun enough, if you are willing to accept the challenge of going to sign up for Prize Picks. You will be well on your way to ensuring that you can set picks in any sport that's out there. Masters not very far away. You got golf. You got women's basketball, as I mentioned tonight. Caitlin Clark going up against Angel Reese. We've got the men's Final Four, which we played on Saturday, as well as the championship game 1 week from today. Major League Baseball back up and running if you're anything like me and or your family is at all similar to mine. The Atlanta Braves were on for all three of their games against the Phillies to start off the season. My boys are obsessed with Braves baseball. There's always a Braves game going on. There's always a Major League Baseball contest. You've also got NHL and NBA coming down the home stretch for the playoffs, if those are your preferred sports. All of that out there for you to take advantage of if you get hooked up today with Prize Picks. It's simple. Go download the Prize Picks app, use code OutKick, you get a $100 match. If you put in $100, they'll give you $100 for free, double your money right off the top. You can turn $10 into $100, lots of 10-to-1 specials. I'll be giving you one for the men's NCAA tournament later this week. We can get you hooked up with the Final Four. We can get you hooked up with $100. How often does that happen? All you have to do is go to prizepicks.com, use that code OutKick, put in $100, you get back $100. Every sport out there, even esports, get hooked up today with Prize Picks. All right, let's talk about what we learned in the Final Four, and I'll break them down for you. First of all, UConn is playing at a different level than everybody else in the NCAA tournament so far. A part of me feels like we are just competing to see who UConn is going to beat last. Illinois is a really good basketball team. They had one of the best offenses in the country. I went to go drive my kids to a friend's house. This game was tied up at 23. I was watching it on Saturday, enjoying it. Man, I sat down. I said, man, this game tied up at 23. Maybe UConn's actually going to get a real challenge. By the time I got back home and sat back down on my couch, UConn was in the middle in the second half of a 30-0 run. I don't remember ever seeing a 30-0 run in major college basketball at any level, much less the Elite Eight. UConn ends up winning by 30 or whatever they have. They have been up through their 4 wins by 30 or more on every single opponent. That's unheard of level dominance. We'll see whether that changes. Congratulations, the Alabama Crimson Tide got the win over North Carolina and got the win over Clemson to advance to their first ever Final Four. My son, the 13-year-old, who is a big Alabama Crimson Tide fan, I know I failed as a parent. You can well tell based on the fact of who his favorite team is. When I told him that the line was 11.5, he said, Bama by 15, UConn's in trouble. And he said that UConn was a poverty program. Did they even play football? So the UConn is an 11.5-point favorite over Alabama on one side of the bracket. Other side of the bracket, NC State, the lovable underdog, even though they obviously are a big program in their own right. They were close to firing their head coach. They had to win 5 games in a row in the ACC tournament, including a crazy bank shot that even got them into the postseason in the first place. That was against UVA, I believe, in the semifinals. They now have won 4 straight games, including an elimination of Duke, which got past Houston, which had an unfortunate injury to Sheed. And as a result, Duke advanced to the Elite Eight, but NC State dominated them. DJ Burns, probably the most likable player in all of the NCAA tournament. Big, strong, let's be honest, fat guy out on the court with incredible footwork. Like many of you, I've been wondering whether he could play tackle. I feel like based on who my Tennessee Titans have played at tackle over the last few years, DJ Burns would probably be as good or better than a lot of the left tackle and right tackle combos that my Tennessee Titans have put out. Peter Schrager's friend of mine said that there are a lot of NFL teams that have taken note of DJ Burns, who does not have the ability to play in the NBA. I'm sure he could play overseas somewhere. But maybe he has the opportunity to play tackle in the NFL. And some of you out there are going to say this is crazy. You remember Antonio Gates was on a Kent State team that went to the Elite Eight and then went and played football at an incredibly high level at tight end. He didn't even play in college. I don't know if DJ Burns ever played football with his footwork, with his arm length, with his height, with his size, with his ability to move. I would think that he would be able to get out and do a great job of blocking in an NFL game. Certainly in a college football game he could. So NC State on to the Final Four as well. My favorite team, University of Tennessee. Dalton Knecht, I said back in November or December, was the best player that I'd ever seen play offensively for Tennessee's men's basketball team, and I stand by that. I think I was 100% right. He put the entire team on his shoulders down the stretch to beat Creighton. He put the entire team on his shoulders for basically the entire game against Purdue. He couldn't quite get them into the Final Four. To be honest with you, and I would love for somebody to do study on this. Adam, if you could pull the numbers again now that Alabama has made its first ever Final Four. Clemson was trying to make the Final Four. This would be a really good study. I believe BYU has the most tournament appearances without making it to the Final Four. BYU has made it to the Elite Eight before. Missouri has a lot of appearances without making it to the Final Four. Creighton also has a lot of appearances without making it to the Final Four. I would bet for you. I would bet that if you factor in seed line, because really, whether you make the Final Four, you also have to consider where you're seeded. That is, if you're a 1, 2, 3, or 4 seed, making the Final Four is far more likely than if you are a 7 or a 10 seed. Coming into this tournament, BYU's at 30, Xavier's at 29, Missouri is at 29. Tennessee is at 26 now. Creighton at 25. Utah State at 24. Those are the most NCAA tournament appearances without reaching a Final Four. Sorry, I think BYU is at 31 now. So BYU, Xavier, Missouri, Tennessee, Creighton, and Utah State all have appeared in the tournament 24 or more times. None of them have made the Final Four. What I would say to you is I bet, if you factor in seeding here, I bet Tennessee, my team, I bet they have failed more than any team in America when it comes to making the Final Four. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're a 10 seed or an 11 seed or a 12 seed, your odds of making the Final Four are very slim. But to my knowledge, Tennessee has been a 2 seed 3 times. They've been a 3 seed at least a couple of times. Adam, you can look this up. They've been a 4 seed, like a 4 or 5 seed, like 5 or 6 times. And they've been a 6 seed because they almost made the Final Four back in 2010. If you're seeded in the top 5, let's just call it the top 5, it's not crazy to think you could make a Final Four run. Because if you're seeded in the top 5, even if you expand it to the top 6, you're a top 25 team, basically, right? One of the 25 best teams. Typically, the teams that make the Final Four are going to come out of that universe. Now, there are exceptions. Obviously, NC State would characterize itself there. I don't know that anybody, Tennessee's been a 2 seed 3 times, a 3 seed at least twice, and I bet a 4 or 5 seed 5 or 6 times, to never have made the Final Four, despite being a high seed that many times. I bet Tennessee has the worst overall performance of any team in all of college basketball. when it comes to not making the Final Four. And I'm not going to lie to you. This was the Purdue win debilitating for me. There have been 2 Tennessee teams in my life that I thought were good enough to legitimately win the national championship. Not get lucky, make a run. I mean, legitimately, they could win 6 games in a row. One of them was the team that Purdue beat in 2019 in overtime. That year, UVA won the tournament. Purdue lost to UVA in the round of 8. Auburn, very questionable officiating in that game. Auburn fans will remember that game as well. That Tennessee team, which was number 1 for large portions of the season, Grant Williams, Admiral Schofield, Josh Bone, all of those guys, was good enough to win the national championship. They lost in the Sweet 16. This team that lost to Purdue was good enough to win the national championship for Tennessee as well. They beat NC State, who's in the Elite Eight. They beat Alabama twice. NC State's in the Final Four. They beat NC State. They beat Alabama twice. They lost to Purdue twice. And in the games that they lost to Purdue in, there were 40 more free throws attempted by Purdue than by Tennessee. And I'm just going to say it. College officials have no idea how to referee Zach Edey. He is allowed to hit people as much as he wants with his body. And if you touch him at all, you put him on the free throw line, whether you barely touch him or whether you hammer him. And I think this is a function. And by the way, he's allowed to stay in the lane for like 10 seconds. There's no 3-second violation, evidently, anymore in college basketball. He wasn't called once. There's video of him spending 10 seconds in the lane multiple times, triple the amount of time you're supposed to spend there. What I would say in general about this is a sign of college officials no longer able to officiate the big man in college basketball. When I was growing up, Shaq was always in foul trouble in college basketball. Anybody who watched Shaq play back in the day at LSU, they blew whistles on him all the time. Shaq was an incredibly athletic. Greg Oden would be another guy, incredibly athletic, could cover ground, could really make it very hard to defend. They were called up for fouls pretty regularly. Zach Edey can get away with anything that he wants to on the basketball court. He attempted over 20 free throws. Tennessee basically touches him. They're calling him for a foul. If he gets officiated like that in the Final Four, Purdue's going to win the title. I really think they will beat even UConn because they're basically saying there is nothing that can be done to Zach Edey. The rules don't apply. Now, I tend to think that the reaction to the game against Tennessee, overwhelmingly people were like, this is ridiculous. This is unfair. I think that they will change the way that they officiate against him in the Final Four. I'm not sure it's going to matter against NC State because I think Purdue is substantially better, and I'm not taking away anything from Purdue's team. I think the 2 best teams all year in college basketball have been UConn and Purdue, and I think they will meet for the national title. And UConn has a big man who potentially could be able to better handle Zach Edey inside. But the way that he was officiated is utterly ridiculous. And the data reflects that I am correct on this. And everything about that, to me, is a function of basically the decline overall of the number of big men that are officiated or even play the game like Zach Edey plays the game anymore. Because I remember back in the day, Shaq would get called for fouls all the time. Shaq is infinitely a better player than everybody out there today is at the center position. By the way, Zach Edey by himself doubled the number of free throws that were taken by the entire Tennessee team. So if you're going to give somebody 40 more free throws in 2 matchups, it's virtually impossible to lose, and kind of remarkable that Tennessee was in 4-point loss and a 6-point loss. Having said that, Dalton Knecht couldn't make the shots down the stretch. I think Tennessee had the ball 4 or 5 times in the final 6 minutes or so with a chance to take the lead, and they couldn't do it. And I'm kind of the opinion at this point. I'll be 45 on Saturday. I'm kind of the opinion now that there is never going to be a Final Four run made by my team. And, like, I'm not saying that in, like, some sort of, like, woe is me world. But if you can't do it, for most of my life, I have said what Tennessee's really missing is a guy that can go out there and get a bucket when you have to have a bucket. I'm not sure there was a better bucket getter in college basketball this year than Dalton Knecht. That is, get him the ball, go 5 wide, let him go 1-on-1, 1-on-1, see if whether or not he's going to get doubled. He leaps well enough to shoot over everybody. He handles the ball well enough to get to the basket. He didn't shoot well from the mid-range against Purdue, but typically he's pretty good in the mid-range pull-up game. Tennessee had the best bucket getter, not counting Zach Edey, who obviously gets the ball fed to him and barely dribbles. I'm talking about a guy that can go get a bucket that exists in college basketball this year, and they still couldn't make the Final Four. Partly that's probably a function of a tough draw, because I think Purdue or UConn would have been tough to beat. This Purdue-Tennessee game probably would have been better in the Final Four. I think Tennessee would beat NC State, as they already have earlier this year. I think they would have beaten Duke. I think Purdue will. I think Purdue will be in the title game. But I don't know that it's ever going to happen. And I was texting with some friends, Tennessee fans, and they were like, man, this is getting dark. I was like, look, I got 35 years left, let's say. If I make it to 80, I'm about to turn 45. In those 35 years, what do we get? 13, 14 NCAA tournament trips, probably. Already, Tennessee has now had, 26? I told you the math here a little bit ago, 25 or 26. So they've had way more opportunities than they are likely to have for the rest of my life, and they've never made a Final Four run. And so, you look at Rick Barnes, he's probably got 2 or 3 years left as a head coach. Can't imagine it's that many more. You got to go get a new coach then. Are you confident you're going to get a new coach who wins at a high level? I'm not necessarily. In which case, I don't know that Tennessee's going to go to the Final Four in my lifetime. And that sucks. And it particularly sucks because I'm like, I wish I knew, because I could just use my time more valuably. I don't want to buy in like I bought into this year's team if it's going to end without them doing something historic. I got better things to do. I got 20 jobs. I got 3 kids. I don't need to sit around and watch Tuesday night SEC basketball like I did this year if I know the story's going to end like it has every year before. Kind of feel like it is. Feel that way a little bit about the Titans. My kids are young. They're all in on the Titans, like who they're going to draft, everything else. I don't buy into Will Levis. I don't think we're ever going to beat Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen. All those guys have a decade left of being really good quarterbacks. I feel like basically I got to turn the page and be like, okay, when I'm 60, is the team going to be able to compete for a Super Bowl then? Because we're not close now. Will Levis, I don't believe, is the answer. So, like, why do I want to commit Sundays to watching a mediocre NFL team play every Sunday? I don't think I will. I think I'll be like, hey, I'm going to find something else to do. You may have no idea what I'm going to get into. I might get into botany. I might get into gardening. There's all sorts of things that maybe I would love that I've never even contemplated because I spent so much time rooting for teams that are never going to win anything. There might be a whole, I don't know why I'm focused on the botany and the gardening. There might be a whole new leaf that I've, no pun intended, that I could turn over. Maybe I would be an incredible painter. I don't know. I've never painted anything. I've written books, founded companies, talk on the radio every day. What other skill might I have? It might be time to explore it. Next thing you know, I may be sitting here in a beret talking about how much time and fun I have painting landscapes. Maybe I'm great at it. Maybe I'm the new Van Gogh, and I just don't know because I've been watching Tennessee basketball lose every year. And those thousands of hours of basketball viewing, I could have been so much more productive. So maybe in the second half of my life, I need to find a new hobby. Turn over a new leaf. We'll see how Purdue gets officiated. Tonight is the LSU and Iowa women's rematch. And I'm less intrigued by this than maybe most people are. I am somewhat intrigued, however, with how LSU has become the most hated team out there. And I think a large degree of it is connected to Kim Mulkey. And I want to talk about LSU women's basketball for a moment. This, to me, is the epitomization of the power of media. LSU's women, nobody had an opinion of the LSU women's basketball program at all a year and a half ago. Not one person could even probably name LSU's women's basketball coach. Most of you couldn't name a single LSU women's basketball player. And then, whatever it was, 10 million people watched LSU play against Iowa, Angel Reese against Caitlin Clark, and the way that LSU won turned into a huge story. The whole, like, you can't see me, the taunting, the pointing at the ring finger by Angel Reese at Caitlin Clark, all of that turned into a massive story. And then everybody starts to pay attention to Kim Mulkey. Most people had ignored her. If she was still at Baylor and she hadn't coached against Caitlin Clark, I think it wouldn't have gotten that much attention. Washington Post is angry because Kim Mulkey was right about COVID and because she is a super passionate and super disciplined and at times super difficult and controlling head coach, as almost every successful head coach is, regardless of men's, women's sports. So the Washington Post plans this huge hit piece where they're really going to go after Kim Mulkey because they want to classify her as homophobic. She wasn't supportive enough of Brittany Griner in the mind of the left-wing media. And so they decided, oh, you know what we have to do? We have to attack Kim Mulkey. That's really where this is coming from. And I think Kim Mulkey gets it. And so they dropped a huge Washington Post, probably like 5,000, 6,000 word piece right before LSU tipped off against UCLA. And it was, I would say it landed with like kind of a thud and like people were like, this is it. Because I think Kim Mulkey was successful in getting the attempt to get her fired, which is what I think this article wanted to do. Get it basically diffused because she went after the Washington Post. And the story landed right before LSU was set to tip against UCLA. And it basically landed with a thud, no real impact. People were not that impressed by it. But what's funny is another left-wing newspaper had a story about LSU's women playing against UCLA, the LA Times, and it actually canceled out all of the Washington Post attention. And the story was about like UCLA's women's team is the good guys and LSU's women's team is the bad guys. And they actually, I couldn't believe this. They actually referred to the LSU women's basketball team as dirty debutantes. Now, dirty debutantes is not a phrase that I would associate with any basketball. I would associate dirty debutantes with porn. And in fact, spoiler alert, when you type in dirty debutantes, all of the results that come back are porn related, except for the LA Times article on the LSU women's basketball team. Now, we are not perfect at the OutKick articles that have been written since I sold OutKick to Fox. In the last 3 years or so since that deal was announced, we have sometimes had headlines that were not perfectly phrased. I don't think we've ever had any articles, and we've published thousands, that would have a reaction like this one, calling them dirty debutantes. And so I wonder on some level, who at the LA Times did not see that phrase and think, boy, this is really an inappropriate article, opinion piece to be running in the LA Times. Like that should set off alarm bells when you're calling college girls dirty debutantes and saying that they are basically not very likable. I can't believe that this didn't set off alarm bells inside of the LA Times. So Kim Mulkey pivoted from going after the Washington Post to going after the LA Times. And then another member of the LSU women's basketball team came out and said, oh, this is racism. This is an example of of what happens when you have black women on your team. I don't think most people actually really know much about the racial makeup of women's college basketball teams. So I disagree that this is race related, but I do think it's a function of the ability of the media to craft a narrative that there is a bad guy or gal and a bad program, and how powerful those characterizations can be. To my knowledge, Kim Mulkey's never really done anything bad. Really, right? Like, it's not like she's been arrested. It's not like she's ever done. She just really wants to win basketball badly, and she is super controlling, and she demands loyalty. And if you don't show loyalty to her, she will cut you off. Is any of that very surprising? Wouldn't you say the same thing about Bobby Knight or Mike Krzyzewski or Pat Summitt or any of the other, Gino Auriemma, hugely successful men's and women's basketball coaches over the last 40 years? I would think that would be an accurate way to describe most of those coaches. But they've decided that they don't like LSU because of Kim Mulkey, because of Angel Reese. But I actually think the attack is not race-related. I actually think it's politics-related to a certain extent. I think people on the left in sports media do not like Kim Mulkey, and I think they wanted to create a storyline where there is a bad guy and a good guy, because good versus evil, typically, it's a really good conflict and a really good contrast. And so that's where I think they're coming from here. But I actually think Kim Mulkey is right about unfair treatment from the Washington Post, unfair treatment from the LA Times. I think the way that the LSU players feel, I think is also justified. I'm curious. I'm going to put up a poll because I genuinely have no idea what my audience would want the outcome of this game to be. Are you rooting for Iowa and Caitlin Clark, or are you rooting for LSU, Angel Reese, and Kim Mulkey? I'm going to put up a poll question about that. But to me, it is indicative of a desire to try to create media characterizations which are not reflected in reality as it pertains to good versus evil in this matchup. One more thing. I saw this shared, and I really had difficulty believing that it was real. The National Organization of Women, which has historically been a very much of a bastion of left-wing, sort of feminist defense. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, people say, I like to say that I'm a feminist, just to really kind of drive people crazy. And then they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I think men should be able to do whatever they want, and I think women should be able to do whatever they want. Really, I'm an individualist. That is, I don't think your success or failure in life should be circumscribed by what your gender is or what your race is or what your sexuality is. I want everyone of talent to be able to rise to the highest possible level that their talent will allow them. But I also believe that biology is real. And I believe that men are bigger, stronger, and faster than women. And I believe that if men are allowed to compete in women's athletics, no woman would make a team. No woman would win a championship. Basically, if we had an Olympics that was gender neutral, there would be almost no female Olympians. And that's not a hyperbole. That's not a exaggeration. I believe that if the Olympics were gender neutral, no women would be able to compete in the Olympics. Men would take up every single spot. And so when I see the national organization, and by the way, I don't even think that's remotely controversial. Maybe women could compete in like archery or in, riflery or in, I don't know, is darts a sport? Like something where all you have to do is aim. I'm not enough of an expert in those sports to know whether gender has a substantial impact in the outcome of those sports. I don't know whether men being bigger, stronger, and faster matters when it comes to like a stationary rifle and aiming it or pulling back a bow and arrow and trying to see how you can do from an archery perspective. But my belief is that there would be virtually no female Olympic medal winners. And that if you watched, say, the opening ceremonies, if there were only gender neutral sports, almost every single person from every single country competing in the Olympics would be male. I don't think that's right. I think that just because a woman is a woman doesn't mean that she should be able to compete at the highest level of women's athletics. Note, I said woman. So I think that makes me a feminist, because I actually believe that women should be able to compete at the highest levels of athletics against other women without men being involved in their sport and trying to take away their ability to win championships. The National Organization of Women said, this was yesterday, repeat after us, weaponizing womanhood against other women is white supremacist patriarchy at work. Making people believe there isn't enough space for trans women in sports is white supremacist patriarchy at work. That's what the National Organization of Women said. White supremacist patriarchy at work is the belief that women should be able to compete against women in women's athletics. What about all the Asian dads and the black dads and the Hispanic dads who have little girls that they're raising and compete in sports and know that this is complete BS and are rejecting the idea that they aren't allowed to acknowledge basic biology? I see some of these things, white supremacist patriarchy, and I just think to myself, how in the world did we get here? To me, I would argue white supremacist patriarchy would actually be a white guy deciding that he wants to be a girl and that he should become the greatest women's athlete ever. That would be white supremacy patriarchy, black supremacy patriarchy, Asian supremacy patriarchy, Hispanic supremacy patriarchy. Because if you are a man and you decide after a whole life living as a man that now you want to identify as a woman, and not only do you want to identify as a woman, you want everybody to claim that you are actually a woman to the extent that you get to compete and win women's championships? How is that not the ultimate male privilege of the patriarchy? You are excluding women from being able to compete in women's spaces based on the falsehood that you are requiring everybody else to submit to, that you are actually a woman, and anybody who argues against you, according to the National Organization of Women, is a white supremacist patriarchy member. People ask, Clay, why is this important? Why do you care? First of all, this is happening everywhere. I care because athletics at its most basic level demands that we have some form of fairness in competition. I would also care if people started to argue that they were trans age and my 16, 13, and 9-year-olds had to compete against 35-year-old men in all of the athletic endeavors that they're involved in, or 25-year-old men. I just went up to Cooperstown, New York. My 12-year-old, in order to compete there, had to have an actual birth certificate. You can't identify as a 12-year-old and be 15. There are rules. You have to be 12 and under. Here's your birth certificate. If you're not, you can compete, but not in the 12 and under. So one, I care about basic fairness applied evenly in the world of sports. Two, and I think this is also really, really important, as soon as people in positions of power can get you to acknowledge things that you know to be untrue and claim that they are true, they control your brain. The woke mind virus infects everything and doesn't allow truth to be used as a defense against it. As soon as you can get me to say that 6'4" dude is a girl and he doesn't have any competitive advantage, and it is only white supremacist patriarchy to argue that he does, you have gotten me to lie, to claim that biology isn't real. To me, it is no different than if you told me, hey, we know that water freezes at 32 degrees, but now I'm going to need you to claim it freezes at 35 degrees, even though we know it's not true. As soon as you can get me to admit publicly something that is 100% untrue, then you control me and you control my thoughts and my ability to express myself. You have gotten me to censor the truth by threatening me with the consequences if I don't submit to your lie. That's why this matters. It doesn't end here. It builds from here. Once you acknowledge a falsehood and are willing to argue in favor of it, you are in the control of the cultural zeitgeist. And I'm not willing to do it. But I think it's important to speak out and recognize and remember how much of that culture is captured. ESPN, which tonight is going to have Caitlin Clark going up against Angel Reese. ESPN said Leah Thomas was one of the women's athletes of the year, worth celebrating on their sports television network. I think ultimately what we need is for a real dude to just say, I'm a woman, and go start dominating the WNBA or the Women's Tennis Association, winning every championship and arguing that their gender ideology is real, and anyone who argues against it is a white supremacist member of the patriarchy. I can't believe this is where we are, but it is where we are. And I'm going to keep fighting as hard as I can. And I'm encouraged by the bravery of people like Riley Gaines and others like her who have been willing to stand up for women's athletics, even if many people out there are cowards, even when they know this is all a lie. All right. I love all of you. I'll be back tomorrow. My name is Clay Travis, DBAP unless you need to SBAP. This has been OutKick, the show.